The night was heavy with rain, the streets glistening under the harsh glare of the street lamps as Ethan Carter's sports car sped recklessly down the avenue, its engine growling like a predator in the dark. Ethan, the only son of Richard Carter, one of the city's most feared and respected millionaires, had grown accustomed to thinking the world belonged to him. He was handsome, wealthy, and untouchable, or so he thought. But as fate would have it, arrogance met reality in the blink of an eye. A delivery truck lurched out from a side street, its tires skidding against the slick pavement. Ethan tried to swerve, but his speed betrayed him. The impact sent his car spinning out of control, metal screeching as it smashed into the truck. The world turned upside down, glass shattering like deadly rain, until the mangled car finally skidded to a halt beneath the towering weight of the truck. The acrid stench of gasoline filled the air, smoke curling into the night like a warning of doom. Ethan's head pounded, warm blood seeping down his temple, his chest pinned under the collapsed frame. Panic clawed at his throat as he screamed for help, his voice echoing down the street. Soon, a crowd gathered, neighbors, passers-by, and curious onlookers pulled by the commotion, but not a single soul dared to come forward. Some clutched their phones, recording the chaos instead of intervening, while others whispered that the boy deserved it, that the Carter family had always looked down on the poor, and perhaps this was karma catching up. Ethan heard their words faintly through the ringing in his ears, and terror mixed with disbelief as he realized that money, power, and privilege could not save him now. Flames began licking at the crumpled hood, each spark threatening to ignite the fuel leaking beneath him, and the cruel irony stung. He, who lived surrounded by bodyguards and luxury, could die here in the gutter while dozens watched in silence. His voice cracked as he cried out once more, "Please, someone, help me." But the only response was hesitation, fearful murmurs, and the steady glow of cameras capturing his desperation. For the first time in his charmed life, Ethan Carter understood what it meant to be powerless, and the cold truth that not even his father's fortune could buy him a savior in that moment. Rosa had just finished her long shift at the mansion where she worked as a maid, her body aching from hours of scrubbing floors and serving meals she could never afford for herself, and in her arms she carried her baby daughter, bundled in a faded pink blanket that smelled faintly of milk and lavender soap. The night was cold, the rain still dripping from the edges of rooftops, and Rosa moved quickly through the dim streets, hoping to reach the small rented room she called home before her child stirred awake. As she approached the commotion ahead, she noticed a crowd gathered, their faces lit by the flashes of cell phone cameras, their voices low with excitement and gossip. Curiosity pulled her closer, but when she saw the twisted metal of a sports car crushed beneath the weight of a delivery truck, her heart skipped a beat. Then she heard it, a desperate voice, hoarse and trembling, begging for help. Her eyes locked onto the face of a young man inside the wreck, blood streaking across his cheek, terror written in his expression. Rosa felt her stomach tighten, because she recognized him instantly, Ethan Carter, the son of her employer's employer, the same man whose arrogance and careless laughter she had seen at the mansion's grand parties. For a brief second, she hesitated, wondering why no one had stepped forward to help, but the answer came quickly as she heard the crowd's whispers, "It's dangerous, the car could explode, don't risk your life for him." A rush of indignation swept through Rosa. How could they all stand there, watching another human being suffer? Hugging her baby tightly, she approached an elderly fruit vendor she trusted, a kind old man who often gave her bruised apples for free, and gently asked him to hold her child for just a moment. The baby whimpered softly, but Rosa kissed her daughter's forehead and whispered, "Mama will be right back." Then, without another thought, she ran toward the wreck. The heat from the engine stung her skin, smoke burned her throat, and Ethan's wide eyes met hers with a mixture of shock and pleading. She pressed her hands against the bent frame, pushing with all her strength, her muscles screaming in protest. "Help me lift," she shouted to the crowd, but they only stepped back further. Rosa gritted her teeth, praying under her breath for strength, as she fought to wedge the metal aside, determined that if no one else would save him, she would. The sterile white walls of the hospital room blurred in Ethan's vision as he slowly regained consciousness, the steady beeping of the monitor beside him marking the rhythm of his survival. His body ached with every breath, bandages wrapped tightly around his ribs, but what startled him most was the sight of a woman sitting quietly at his bedside, a baby nestled against her chest. For a moment he thought he was dreaming, but as his memory sharpened, the images of the accident flooded back, the smoke, the fire, the helplessness, and then her face, determined and unyielding, dragging him out of the wreck when no one else had dared. "You," he croaked weakly, his throat dry. Rosa turned, her tired eyes softening with relief, and leaned closer. "You're safe now," she whispered, rocking her baby gently as if reassuring them both. Ethan blinked, struggling to understand why this woman, a stranger burdened with her own child, had risked everything for him when dozens of able-bodied people had stood by and watched. Moments later, the door burst open and Richard Carter swept in, his tailored suit and commanding presence filling the room like a storm. "Ethan," his father exclaimed, his voice breaking with rare emotion as he rushed to his son's side. But instead of turning to him, Ethan reached for Rosa's hand, clutching it weakly as if it anchored him to the world. Richard frowned, confused and unsettled to see his son clinging to a maid, someone from the very class he had spent his life dismissing. "Who is she?" he demanded. Ethan's gaze, still glassy but sincere, shifted from his father back to Rosa, and for the first time in his life, his words carried humility. "She's the reason I'm alive." Richard's jaw tightened, his pride wrestling with gratitude, but he said nothing as Ethan continued, his voice trembling. "They all watched, Father. No one helped me. Not one person cared, except her." The room grew heavy with silence, broken only by the cooing of Rosa's baby. Ethan's heart swelled with something unfamiliar, respect, gratitude, and an aching awareness of how fragile life truly was. In that moment, the spoiled millionaire's son saw Rosa not as a servant, but as a savior, a woman of quiet strength who had shown him more humanity than all his wealth ever had. Weeks passed, and though Ethan's body healed slowly, the transformation in his heart was far swifter and far deeper than anyone could have imagined. He no longer spent his days flaunting wealth or mocking those beneath his station. Instead, he found himself replaying that night over and over, the flames, the silence of the crowd, and Rosa's trembling hands straining to lift the wreckage while cradling the responsibility of her baby in her heart. It humbled him in ways money never could. When he finally returned to the Carter Corporation's towering glass building, the employees expected the same arrogant air, yet what they saw shocked them. Ethan stood at the head of the conference table, his voice steady but uncharacteristically compassionate, speaking not of profits and prestige but of change. He proposed funding safety programs for city workers, creating scholarships for Maid's children, and offering better wages and benefits for the lowest-paid staff. The executives murmured in disbelief, and Richard Carter himself watched with narrowed eyes, struggling to recognize his son. Later that evening, Ethan invited Rosa to attend a small gathering at the mansion, not as a servant but as a guest. She entered hesitantly, her baby balanced on her hip, feeling out of place among the chandeliers and polished marble, but Ethan greeted her with warmth and respect, introducing her proudly as the woman who had saved his life. Murmurs rippled through the elite crowd, some scandalized, others quietly moved. When Richard finally approached, his expression unreadable, Rosa braced herself for disdain, but instead the hardened millionaire extended his hand and said simply, "Thank you for giving me back my son." Tears welled in Rosa's eyes, not from pride, but from the overwhelming sense that her small act of courage had altered the course of two powerful lives. That night, as Ethan walked her to the gate, he bent down to look at her baby and whispered, "Your mother is the bravest person I've ever known." Rosa smiled faintly, her humility shining as she replied, "I only did what anyone should do." Yet both of them knew that wasn't true, because when no one else had moved, she had. And as Ethan watched mother and child disappear into the night, he vowed silently that the second chance he'd been given would not be wasted, for he now understood that true wealth was measured not in gold or cars, but in courage, compassion, and the bonds we choose to honor.